Finding love? Yeah, that can lead you down some pretty strange and often dangerous roads. But for Sheila Davalo, it wasn't just a simple detour, it became a full-on obsession. A talented pharmaceutical researcher with a bright future ahead, Sheila seemed like she had it all together. But little did she know, her world was about to spiral into chaos. It started innocently enough, just a casual affair, right? But you can guess how that went. Enter the tangled love triangle of doom. Sheila, her coworker Nelson Cesler, and his girlfriend Lisa Rundo. It looked like one of those soap operas, only it wasn't scripted, and the ending? Yeah, not so pretty. What started as a mere fling quickly escalated to something much, much darker. We're talking murder-level messy. On November 8, 2002, at precisely 12:19 p.m., the police got a 911 call that would forever change the course of everyone's lives. A frantic voice reported a violent incident at the home of Lisa Rundo in Stamford, Connecticut. So what did the cops find when they arrived? A bloody, brutal scene straight out of a nightmare. Lisa's lifeless body, stabbed multiple times, found near the entrance of her condo. It was the stuff of horror movies, but the twist? The killer? Well, it was Sheila Davalo. That's right, Sheila. Let's rewind a bit. Sheila wasn't always some cold-blooded murderer. Born May 11th, 999 in Iran, she moved to the United States with her family in the 70s, chasing a better life. Fast forward to her time at St. Brooke University, where she earned a degree in biochemistry. From there, Sheila worked her way up in the pharmaceutical world, landing a job at Paru Pharma in Stamford, Connecticut. Things were going great until her personal life fell apart, that is. Sheila was married to a guy named Ferd Mavi, but like a bad sitcom, that relationship fizzled fast. Why? Oh, just a little affair with a fellow grad student named Paul Christos, whom she met at New York Medical College. That little love triangle ended in a messy divorce, and she was left to pick up the pieces of her broken heart. But instead of taking time to heal, Sheila dove right into another relationship with her coworker Nelson Cesler. Big mistake. This would turn out to be the affair that would blow everything to hell. But here's the thing, Nelson, he wasn't just into Sheila. No. He was also seeing someone else. Lisa Rundo. Yep, you guessed it, the Lisa, who would be found dead on that fateful day in 2002. So, now you've got Sheila, Nelson, and Lisa all tangled in this ugly love triangle where jealousy, obsession, and rage bubble to the surface. And let's be honest, nobody likes the third wheel, right? Especially when the third wheel is your romantic rival. Cue the tension. Days before the murder, things were getting real heated. Sheila knew that Lisa was the one standing between her and Nelson, and let's just say, Sheila wasn't the type to play nice. She was ready to take what she wanted. Fast forward to the morning of November 8, 2002. Lisa, blissfully unaware of the storm headed her way, was in her Stamford condo. What happened next? Sheila showed up, and it didn't end in coffee and a chat. The attack was swift and savage, multiple stab wounds, mainly to the neck, face, and chest. This wasn't some random spur-of-the-moment attack. No, this was personal. Real personal. Witnesses later reported hearing screams from the condo, which only added fuel to the fire. Something was off here. After this savage assault, Sheila did what any murderer would do. She bolted. Left the body, left the chaos. Wasn't long before the body was discovered. A neighbor walked into Lisa's condo later that day and found her unresponsive, immediately calling 911. When the police arrived, what did they find? A scene of violence and disarray, no signs of forced entry, meaning Lisa likely knew her killer. And there was blood everywhere. It was a frenzy. A bloody mess that suggested one thing. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was cold, calculated rage. Nelson was called in to identify Annalisa's body, and get this, his reaction? Totally chill. Too chill. The dude was way too calm for someone whose girlfriend had just been brutally murdered. Alarm bells went off in the investigators' heads. They dug into Nelson's alibi and confirmed he was at work at the time of the murder. But the drama? Oh, it's far from over. Supported by CCTV footage during the investigation, witnesses reported seeing a man named Gary Riley near Annalisa's apartment on the day of the murder. After further questioning and examination of evidence, Gary was clear of any involvement. Despite these leads, investigators lacked sufficient evidence to charge anyone with the crime. The case remained open as they continued to gather information and analyze potential suspects. In March 2003, Sheila Davalo stabbed her husband, Paul Christos, during what she later claimed was an accident while playing a game that involved handcuffs and blindfolds. On March 22nd, Sheila introduced Paul to a guessing game where he was restrained and unable to see. During this game, objects were touched against him, creating an atmosphere of playful intimacy. However, the situation escalated on March 23rd when Sheila stabbed Maul twice with a paring knife inside their Pleasantville, New York condo medium. After the initial stabbing, Sheila hesitated to call 911 for medical assistance. Eventually, she drove Paul to the hospital, but stopped in a secluded area behind the facility where she attempted to stab him again. Paul was found in the hospital parking lot with multiple stab wounds. He underwent emergency surgery and survived the attack. Following the incident, Sheila was charged with attempted murder while she maintained that the stabbings were accidental in a part of the game they were playing. After the stabbing of Paul Christos, police began to uncover inconsistencies between Sheila Davalo's account of events and Paul's version. Sheila claimed that the incident was an accident during a game. However, investigators noted discrepancies in her statements that raised suspicions about her narrative, further complicating matters. It was revealed that after stabbing Paul, Sheila had called Nelson Cesler instead of contacting 911 for immediate medical assistance. This decision drew the attention of law enforcement as it suggested a potential motive and connection to her previous relationship with Nelson. On February 19, 2004, Sheila was convicted of attempted murder against Paul Christos and sentenced to 25 years without parole at Bedford Hills Maximum Security Prison following Sheila's conviction for attempted murder. Police revisited the unsolved case of Lisa Rundo. Public statements made by Annalisa's father, Renato Randu, played a significant role in refocusing the investigation on Sheila. He publicly expressed his belief that Sheila was responsible for his daughter's murder, stating, "I believe she is the one who killed my daughter." This assertion prompted investigators to examine the evidence from Lisa's case more closely. They began to connect the dots between Sheila's violent behavior towards Paul and her potential motive for Annalisa's murder, leading them to consider Sheila as the prime suspect in the earlier homicide. The investigation into both cases would ultimately reveal critical evidence linking Sheila to the murder of Lisa Rundo. Following Sheila Davalo's conviction for the attempted murder of her husband, police began to link her case to the unsolved murder of Lisa Rundo. Investigators revisited the evidence from both cases, focusing on the timeline and relationships involved. The examination revealed that Sheila had been in a romantic relationship with Nelson Cesler, who was dating Annalisa at the time of her murder. This connection raised questions about Sheila's motives and potential involvement in Annalisa's death. The investigation into the attempted murder had already uncovered Sheila's violent tendencies. leading authorities to consider whether these behaviors extended to her actions towards Annalisa. As they pieced together the evidence, investigators found that Sheila's obsession with Nelson could have played a significant role in both incidents. This critical link prompted law enforcement to intensify their scrutiny of Sheila's past and her relationship dynamics on November 6, 2007. Nearly 5 years after Annalisa Rumundo's murder, Sheila Davalo was arrested for the crime. At the time of her arrest, she was still serving her sentence for the attempted murder of Paul Christos. The circumstances surrounding her arrest involved a thorough investigation that connected her to Annalisa's death through DNA evidence and other forensic findings. As police compiled their case against Sheila, they presented compelling evidence that suggested she had the motive and opportunity to commit the murder. The arrest marked a significant turning point in the investigation as it linked Sheila directly to a crime that had long remained unsolved. Law enforcement officials were now prepared to move forward with charges related to Annalisa Rumundo's murder, setting the stage for a high-profile trial in the years to come in the lead-up to Sheila Davalo's trial for the murder of Annalisa Rundo. Several pretrial motions were filed concerning the admissibility of evidence. One significant motion was related to uncharged misconduct stemming from Sheila's attempted murder of her then-husband, Paul Christos. The prosecution sought to introduce this evidence to establish a pattern of behavior that would illuminate Sheila's motive and intent regarding the murder of Annalisa. The court ultimately ruled in favor of the prosecution, determining that the evidence was relevant and critical for understanding the context of Sheila's actions. The judge emphasized that while the evidence of uncharged misconduct could evoke strong emotions, it did not unduly prejudice the jury. The court noted that Sheila's manipulative behavior and her attempted murder of Christos were indicative of her obsessive nature, which was central to the prosecution's case. By allowing this evidence, the court aimed to provide jurors with a comprehensive view of Sheila's psychological state and motivations leading up to Annella's murder. This ruling set the stage for a trial focused on uncovering the complexities of Sheila's relationships, her potential motives for committing such a violent act. The trial of Sheila Davalo was structured as a jury trial and lasted over 2 weeks. Sheila made the significant decision to represent herself, foregoing legal counsel in favor of direct control over her defense. This choice allowed her to confront witnesses and present her case in her own words, but it also placed the burden of navigating legal procedures and courtroom rules entirely on her shoulders. The pros presented a compelling case, arguing that Sheila Davalo's motive for murdering Annalisa Rundo stemmed from an obsessive desire to rekindle her relationship with Nelson Cesler. They contended that Sheila's jealousy over Nelson's relationship with Annalisa drove her to commit the crime. The prosecution emphasized the emotional turmoil, rivalry that characterized the love triangle, painting a picture of a woman whose fixation on Cesler led to drastic and violent actions in their arguments. The prosecution described the murder as cold and calculated. They asserted that Sheila had planned the attack, highlighting the premeditated nature of her actions. This characterization was supported by evidence that suggested Sheila had been stalking Annalisa and plotting to eliminate her as her rival by framing the murder in this way. The prosecution aimed to convey the jury that Sheila's actions were not impulsive, but rather the result of deliberate choice fueled by obsession to further strengthen their case. The prosecution introduced unchanged misconduct evidence related to Sheila's attempted murder of Paul Christos, her then-husband. This evidence illustrated a pattern of behavior that was critical in establishing Sheila's motive and intent. The court had already ruled this evidence to be relevant to understanding Sheila's psychological state and her propensity for violence, thereby allowing the jury to see a broader context for her actions. The prosecution argued that these incidents were not isolated, but part of a larger pattern of manipulative and dangerous behavior. They posited that Sheila's history of violence against Krista indicated a willingness to resort to extreme measures when faced with emotional challenges or perceived threats to her desires. This pattern was essential in demonstrating how deeply ingrained Sheila's obsession with Cesler was and how it ultimately culminated in Annalisa's murder. Overall, the prosecution's arguments were structured to create a narrative of obsession, manipulation, and premeditated violence, aiming to convince the jury of Sheila's guilt in the first-degree murder of Lisa Rundo to back up their claims. The prosecution had a key piece of evidence. First up, the prosecution presented compelling forensic evidence that Sheila's DNA was found on a SN handle in Annalisa's apartment. This critical piece of evidence established a direct link between Sheila and the crime scene, suggesting that she had been present during the murder. The forensic analysis indicated that the DNA was consistent with Sheila's profile, which became a focal point for the prosecution's argument. The next piece of evidence presented by the prosecution was an analysis of the 911 call made on the 8th of November 2002 after Anella's murder. A voice recognition expert testified that Sheila was the caller who alerted police to Anissa's home. The analyst indicated a 68% accuracy match between Sheila's voice and the caller, which the prosecution argued was significant enough to support their case. This evidence suggested that Sheila may have been trying to deflect suspicion away from herself by luring authorities to the scene. Apart from two key pieces of evidence, the state prosecutors also had a couple of testimonies lined up against Sheila Davalo. First up was Paul Christos, Sheila's ex-husband. He provided testimony about his troubling marriage with Sheila, detailing violent incidents, including his own, but dabbing at her hands during a game involving handcuffs and a blindfold, for which Sheila was already serving a 25-year sentence. His testimony highlighted Sheila's capacity for violence and manipulation, painting a picture of a woman who resorted to extreme measures when faced with emotional turmoil. Next up to the witness box was the man for whom the entire tragedy seemed to have taken place. Nelson Cesler testified about his relationship with both women, explaining how he became serious with Anissa while distancing himself from Sheila. His insights into his interactions with Sheila revealed her obsessive tendencies and provided context for the rivalry that led to Anella's murder. Sheila Davalo chose to represent herself during her trial, a decision that allowed her to directly confront witnesses and control the narrative of her defense. This choice was significant, as it meant she would have to navigate the complex eddies of legal procedures and courtroom decorum without the guidance of an attorney. Sheila's self-representation was a strategic move aimed at asserting her autonomy in the proceedings, but it also placed considerable pressure on her to effectively argue her case against experienced prosecutors. The defense focused on challenging the prosecution's evidence and creating reasonable doubt regarding Sheila's guilt. One of their primary strategies was to question the reliability of the DNA evidence presented by the prosecution. Sheila argued that while her DNA was found on the sink handle, there were numerous ways it could have been contaminated or left there without her being present during the murder, suggesting that the presence of her DNA did not definitely prove she was involved in Annalisa's death. Additionally, Sheila targeted the voice recognition analysis that linked her to the 911 call. She pointed out that the match was only 68% accurate, stating they say Harry Connick Jr. and Frank Sinatra sound alike, attempting to cast doubt on the validity of this evidence. Sheila emphasized that Without clear identification or stronger forensic evidence directly tying her to the act of murder, there remained significant uncertainty about her culpability. Furthermore, Sheila introduced alternative suspects based on evidence found at the crime scene. She highlighted a blue contact lens discovered in Annalisa hair, arguing that it indicated someone else could have been involved in the murder. Sheila also referenced witnesses who claimed to have seen a man and a woman arguing outside Anissa's apartment around the time of the murder, suggesting that these individuals should be considered as potential suspect ECTs during cross-examinations. Sheila focused on questioning Paul Christos and Nelson Cesler to identify inconsistencies in their testimonies. She aimed to undermine their credibility and highlight any contradictions that could support her defense. First up was Paul's turn. During his testimony, Sheila confronted Paul about his account of their marriage and his stabbing incident at one point. When asked by prosecutors to reveal his scars from the stabbing, Sheila broke down emotionally in court, but later attempted to deflect by making a joke about her emotional response. Sheila sought to establish that Paul had previously described their relationship as nonviolent and loving before the stabbing incident, which she argued contradicted his portrayal of her as a violent person. Then it was Nelson Cesler's turn for the cross-questioning examination. And cross-examining Cesler, Sheila attempted to extract details about his relationship with Annalisa and how it developed after their affair ended. She questioned him about his commitment to Annalisa and whether he had ever expressed doubt about the relationship. Sheila aimed to portray Cesler as someone who may have had motives or reasons for wanting Annalisa out of the picture, thus diverting suspicion away from herself. Throughout these cross-examinations, Sheila had one motive: to create considerable doubt in the jury's mind regarding both witness reliability and the prosecution's narrative by emphasizing inconsistencies in introducing alternative theories. She aimed to present herself not as a murderer, but as a victim of circumstances, caught in a complex web of relationships. After the conclusion of the trial, the jury began their deliberations, which lasted a day and a half following the closing arguments from both prosecution and defense. During this time, jurors focused intently on the DNA evidence presented by the prosecution, as well as its implications for Sheila Davalo's guilt. The presence of Sheila's DNA on the sink handle in Lisa Rundo's apartment was a critical point of discussion among jurors who weighed its significance against the defense's claims of contamination and alternative explanations. The jury also considered the voice analysis that linked Sheila to the 911 call made on the day of Anissa's murder. Although Sheila's defense attempted to undermine this evidence by arguing its reliability, jurors were tasked with determining whether the prosecution had established a strong enough case to provide Sheila's guilt. Beyond a reasonable doubt, on February 10th, 2012, the jury reached their verdict. After deliberating for a day and a half, they found Sheila Davalo guilty on first-degree murder of the death of Lisa Rundo. The account was met with a mix of emotions in the courtroom, particularly from Naisa's family, who had attended every day of the trial. The verdict marked a significant moment in the case that had drawn considerable public attention and highlighted complex issues surrounding obsession and violence. The conviction set the stage for sentencing proceedings, where Sheila faced potential penalties ranging from 25 to 60 years in prison for her crime. The jury's decision underscored their belief that the evidence presented by the prosecution had convincingly demonstrated Sheila's guilt in this tragic case. The sentencing hearing for Sheila Davalo took place on April 27, 2008. 12, presided over by Judge Richard Comfort. This hearing followed the jury's guilty verdict for first-degree murder marking a critical point in the legal proceedings. The courtroom was filled with family members and supporters, all awaiting the judge's decision regarding Sheila's fate. During the sentencing phase, the prosecutor made a compelling case for a maximum sentence based on the nature of the crime. They argued that the murder was not only premeditated, but also executed in a particularly brutal, the death of Lisa Rundo, a violent, chaotic struggle. When Lisa Rundo's life was tragically cut short, it wasn't a simple case of a random act of violence. Oh no, it was a full-on bloodbath. The prosecution was on a mission to make sure the jury understood just how violent the struggle was. Lisa fought for her life. She didn't go down without a fight. Multiple stab wounds? Yeah, those weren't from some casual attacker. Those were the marks of someone desperate to survive, fighting like hell. But in the end, it was all in vain. Sheila Davalo, in her twisted obsession, had made up her mind, and she wasn't stopping until Lisa was gone. So what did the prosecution do? They pushed hard, emphasizing just how cold-blooded Sheila's actions were, the severity of this murder, the brutal attack, the calculated nature of the whole thing. This wasn't a fit of rage or a momentary lapse of judgment. This was a deliberate, vicious act. A life was taken, and the prosecution argued it deserved a punishment that matched the severity of that act. But, of course, the defense wasn't about to just roll over. Nope, they came out swinging. Their argument? Sheila wasn't some evil mastermind out to destroy lives. Oh no, she had issues, man. Mental health issues, psychological struggles. They pointed to her troubled past, her emotional scars, her personal demons, and suggested that these were the real reasons for her violent actions. According to the defense, Sheila wasn't driven by malice, but by deep-seated, unresolved psychological trauma. Yeah, okay, that sounds real nice, but it doesn't change the fact that someone's dead. In the end, Judge Comerford wasn't having any of that poor Sheila narrative. He slapped down the gavel and handed down a 50-year prison sentence for first-degree murder. And let me tell you, that wasn't just a slap on the wrist. Oh no. At 42 years old, with her age considered and her history of violence, this sentence effectively meant life in prison. And don't forget, Sheila had already been slapped with a 25-year sentence for attempted murder back in New York, adding up to a grand total of 75 years behind bars. Judge Comerford didn't pull punches. He made sure to highlight the cold, calculated nature of Sheila's crime, calling out the emotional toll on Lisa's family and the community. This wasn't a case of, oops, my bad. No. This was a calculated murder, and Sheila was going to pay for it. The trial was a media circus thanks to the twisted love triangle and the sheer drama of it all. I mean, come on. It's like they just plucked this straight out of a soap opera, but the stakes were much, much higher. You couldn't look away from this one. It had everything: jealousy, obsession, betrayal, and a murder that made your skin crawl. After the sentencing, Sheila made it clear she wasn't going down without a fight. She wanted to appeal. She thought there were plenty of grounds to overturn her conviction, including questioning the admissibility of evidence and her decision to represent herself during the trial. Because obviously, when you're facing a murder conviction, representing yourself is a great idea, right? Well, spoiler alert, the court wasn't having any of it. Her motion to delay the start of her sentence was denied, and just like that, boom, Sheila began serving her 75 years immediately. No second chances, no let's talk it over. And that's the tragedy of Sheila Davalo's story, an unstable woman driven by obsession, someone unable to control her emotions and spiraling into a violent frenzy. The case is a mess of what-ifs and could-haves, but let's ask the tough questions. Could this have been avoided? What could have been done differently to prevent this tragic ending? And what about the jury? Did they make a mistake by not fully considering Sheila's mental health issues during sentencing? Look, regardless of whether she was messed up in the head or not, Sheila did two things that were just plain unforgivable. She tried to murder one person and succeeded in murdering another. Those are some major crimes, people. And let's not forget about her attempted murder of Paul Christos, which got her a 25-year sentence back in 2004. Then there's the murder of Lisa Rundo, for which she was convicted on February 10th, 2012. That brings us to the grand total 75 years in prison, a life sentence that started when she was just 42 years old. At that point, it's safe to say her chances of ever walking free again were pretty much zero.